god, the 80s was 40 years ago? Ugh. I don't want to think about that. Hello friends, foes, and those still under review. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be going through every book that I read in the first 3 months of this year. So to get started, since this is my very first reading wrap up, we'll go through kind of like the order of operations here. So my plan is to kind of go through all of the statistics for the month first, and then give you a summary and a bit of a review of every book that I read. All of the statistics that I have I got from the story graph. They're really good for keeping track of that kind of thing. But all the graphics and stuff were made by me in Canva. So this is going to be a bit of a long one, so you can settle in and grab yourself a cup of tea, or you can just set me down in the background like a podcast and, I don't know, clean your bathroom or something. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So, starting with January, I read 10 books total that month. I read 2,222 pages, which is just so satisfying to see on there. I listened to a total of 14.95 hours of audiobook. The average length of book that I read was 255 pages, and I had an average rating of 4.48 stars. I read 4 different genres. I read 6 romance novels, 2 fantasy, 1 horror, and 1 straight-up erotica. As for format, 9 were digital on my Kindle, and 1 was an audiobook. And for sources, 4 of them came from the library, 3 came from Kindle Unlimited, 2 of them were ARCs, and 1 was purchased. The ARCs were the very first ARCs I've ever gotten, so, you know, yay. January was a very exciting month. So, let's get into the books. The first book that I read was Gothikana by Onyx, and it was fine. So the book is about a girl named Corvina Clem. She's a little bit of an outcast. She receives a letter of admission to Varanmore University shortly after her mother is taken from her. While she's there, she meets a man named Vad Deverell, who is very intense and also a TA or a temporary professor or something, I can't remember the specifics, at the university. And the two share an immediate connection. So the whole book is about them kind of navigating their forbidden relationship, all while there is some really shady stuff going on. The university as a whole has a history of murder and disappearances and stuff like that. People think the place is cursed, and so the whole book is just kind of like navigating that. So this book was fine, you know, it was just kind of meh for me. It wasn't bad per se, it just didn't wow me, I guess. It kind of had the same sort of vibe as like an 80s gothic romance that you'd like pick up at the supermarket. You know, the ones with like the girl on the cover running through a cemetery, those ones, except not as cheesy. And the whole charm of those books from the 80s was like the fact that they were so cheesy and ridiculous. That's the whole vibe, and this just didn't have that. It was very predictable, or at least I want to say it was predictable, but there was one specific aspect of the twist at the end that I don't want to give away that I didn't see coming. You can pretty easily guess the rest of it. However, I found that it was really well written. I really like Onyx's prose and that kind of stuff, and it was a really easy read. So if you are looking for a softer introduction to kind of the darker romances, or if you were a big fan of those like paranormal YA romances that were really, really big in like the later 2000s, kind of early 2010s, this would be a good choice for you, I think. So, the next book I read was The Blood of Elves by Andrzej Sapkowski. It's the first book in the Witcher series proper. The rest of them are all the short stories and stuff like that that kind of come before. So, Blood of Elves starts off after Season of Storms. It starts off with Geralt taking Ciri to Kaer Morhen, which is like the home of the Witchers. It's kind of like their home base where they stay for the winter a lot of the time. After the fall of Sintra, people have been looking for her all over the place, and there are people that don't really have the best intentions for her, so this is kind of like the safest place to hide with her until they can figure out what to do there. So that's kind of where it starts. And then when the spring comes, they leave and they meet up with Yennefer and all that good stuff. So there's a lot of political stuff that goes on in this book. Stuff like Nilfgaard pushing northward into the rest of the continent, trying to take it over while they're looking for Ciri. That's probably my biggest complaint about the whole book, is there is so much political stuff going on. It is an awful lot to keep up with, so be aware of that going in. I know I have the physical copy somewhere in my house, and I have quite a bit of a wait for the rest of the series to be made available on Libby to me, so I might do a reread, and I will definitely be, not necessarily annotating, but I will be putting some flags in, just that I can keep track of all the political stuff a little bit better, because I feel like that's hampering my understanding of the rest of the story. I can't keep anything straight. You know, I wish it was a little bit more like Game of Thrones, where there's like appendices at the back to kind of like help you figure out what the hell is going on, but since it's not so far, I will just have to make do with what I got. As for the rest of my thoughts, Kaer Morhen is full of girl dads, and no one can tell me any different. differently. I wish that we got more time there. The way that the rest of the Witchers treat Ciri is just adorable. You know, they all act tough, but when it comes to her, they're all like a little bit soft, and you can kind of tell that, and I loved every second of that. So I wish we had more of those interactions, but I'm glad we got what we did. I really enjoyed it. I definitely would recommend it to you. I can't speak for the rest of the series quite yet, but yeah, that specific book and then the short stories in the other two are very good, and I recommend them. So the next book that I read was A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher, and I really enjoyed this one. This one is about an entomologist named Sam whose project is put on hiatus because of budgeting issues. So she goes to spend, a month or so with her mom. When she gets to her mom's house, she notices a few things right away. First of all, the giant vulture that's sitting on the mailbox, that's odd to her. She also notices that her mom is oddly jumpy, and she has been changing things in their house back to the way it was when their grandmother was alive. And for context, her grandmother was not a super wonderful person, we'll just leave it at that. So after she passed away and they inherited the house, they decorated it, brightly colored and stuff like that to make it a little bit more theirs. But when Sam gets home, she notices that her mom has changed a bunch of stuff kind of back to the way that her grandmother had it. And she thinks that's a little bit weird because her mom never liked it the way that her grandmother had it. But after she's been there for a few days, she notices some weird things happening. So she's having weird dreams, she's hearing weird things in the house, infestations of bugs every once in a while. She finds a jar of teeth in the yard that she thinks is super weird. So she decides, with the help of the maintenance guy that her mom has hired, to do a little bit of digging. So she digs into her family history a little bit, finds some weird stuff in her family tree, finds some weird stuff in the history of the house itself, and so things kind of go just downhill from there. And my thoughts, I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed this book. I have loved everything that I have read from T. Kingfisher. This has to be my favorite so far. Just if you're new here and you didn't know, I have a Bachelor of Science in biology. I used to work for Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada doing pasture research and stuff like that. So academia is an environment that I know well, and so a lot of her just little quips and side comments that she has just entertained me to no end. And I loved her character so much. And just the story itself was really interesting to me. Just, the way that things unfolded and the stuff that she finds out. I really enjoyed it. The only thing about this book I really didn't like was the kind of climax when they banished the big bad evil thing. And it's not even that I didn't like it, I just felt like it was a little bit out of place. I kind of almost felt like it belonged in a different book. But having sat on it for a little bit, I think it's fine. That's, it is what it is. I still really enjoyed the book, and I would still highly recommend it. The other thing that I really enjoyed is I also have had a complicated relationship with one of my grandmothers. Just some of Sam's thoughts on her relationship with her grandmother are things that I haven't necessarily been able to articulate in a coherent way. So just having somebody else put it into words for me, I found really cathartic in a way. So yeah, if you are a fan of lighter horror novels, this one's a really good pick, I think. Definitely give it a read. The next book that I read was My Date with a Pair of Gray Sweatpants. This was a sentient object romance that was part of the Sentient Object holiday series that a bunch of different authors got together in January to do, and it ran from January to April, I think, and they're all on Kindle Unlimited. So this is the first one that I read from that series. And so the whole premise of the book was that our heroine Caitlin is looking for a dress to alter for her drag queen friend. They go to the thrift store, they find the perfect pink dress in a grab bag, so they buy the grab bag. While her and her friend are out, they go for pizza, and since Caitlin is a girl with stomach issues, the pizza does not sit well with her. So she gets home, she's really going through it with her stomach issues, and she's looking for something comfortable to wear. Unfortunately, it's also laundry day, so she digs through this grab bag a little bit, and she finds a almost mint condition pair of gray sweatpants. So since they look clean and she is, super uncomfortable and just wants to go to bed, she puts on the sweatpants, goes to sleep. Then she wakes up in the arms of a very attractive man who disappeared almost 40 years ago. Oh my god, the 80s was 40 years ago? Ugh. I don't want to think about that. They both think they're dreaming. Neither of them thinks that the other one is real. But after Caitlin investigates a little bit more, she finds out that this man is in fact real, and that his toxic boy mom of a mother cursed him to live in his childhood bedroom for the rest of eternity after he brings home his girlfriend to meet her for the first time. Totally reasonable reaction, right? No. So since Caitlin and Matthew kind of are developing feelings for one another after this, keeps happening for a couple of weeks, they decide that they have to figure out how to break the curse or they're gonna risk being separated forever. This was really cute. I thought that this was a very, very fun twist on the sentient object romance genre. I know Dakota doesn't write a lot of these, but she did a fantastic job, I have to say. There was also a sequel, which was also coincidentally my very first arc, which brings us to the next book that I read, My Date with a White T-Shirt, also by Dakota Kakade. Annalise, who is an aspiring actress, goes to the same thrift store that the Sweatpants came from and buys a white t-shirt for a play that she's in. But after she buys this t-shirt, she starts running into this really attractive guy named Michael, who just happens to pop up wherever she is. But the difference between this book and the last one is that she's seeing Michael in her everyday life, like she's not asleep or anything like that. So it turns out that this guy is Michael, who is the twin brother of Matthew. And Michael and Matthew's mother also cursed Michael when he brought home his fiance for the weekend for her to meet and like get to know her a little bit better. Yeah, mom didn't take this well, so now Michael is also trapped in his childhood bedroom. And so Matthew and Caitlin make a cameo in this book. Everything is really cute. They're very short, they're bite-sized. If you are a fan of sentient object romance at all, give these a shot. So next up is Leather and Lark by Bryn Weaver. So this is the sequel to Butcher and Blackbird, and it is the second book in the Ruinous Love trilogy. The next one is Scythe and Sparrow, which I don't think is out yet. So in this book, Lachlan, who is the second of the Kane brothers, and Lark Montague, who is Sloane's best friend from Butcher and Blackbird, decide to enter into a marriage of convenience. And if you read the first book, you know that that's not going to go super well because they cannot stand each other. In the first chapter of this book, we kind of learn why they don't like each other, which is, you know, kind of understandable, having read it now. But the whole reason that Lark proposes this marriage of convenience is to A, keep him alive and hopefully use his resources as a hitman to track down somebody who's been threatening her family. But this will also help her keep Lachlan, his brother Rowan, and by extension her best friend Sloane, safe from her family. And then in doing so, she's going to help him get free from the man who rescued Lachlan and his brothers. The only problem is, since they hate one another, they are going to have to work very hard to make their marriage look legitimate to her family and Lachlan's employer. And so they have to do all of this while hunting down the guy that's hunting Lark before they kill one another, essentially. I love this book. I think that Lachlan is my favorite of the Kane brothers at this point. He's just, I don't know, there's just something about him. He just seems a little bit more controlled than Rowan, if that makes sense. I don't know. I love the continuation of the story. We got to know Rose a little bit better. I didn't really love her character in the first book, but we got to see more of her this time around, and I don't know, she's growing on me. And I think her book is the next one, so I guess we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I thought it was really good. I promise you the dog lives. That was a concern that I had, because I'm always worried about that. If there's a dog in a book, the dog lives. The dog is fine. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. If you liked Butcher and Blackbird, you're definitely going to like this one. Alright, I had to take a short break, but we're back, and we are moving right along with My Date with Water by Unfortunate Reads. So our girl Marina has just gone through a really terrible breakup and has moved back in with her parents. Because she's moved back in with her parents, she's feeling a little bit repressed, shall we say. So when she sees a bunch of headlines that are reporting, and I quote, unassisted spontaneous orgasms at a particular beach, she decides the best thing to do would be to rent a cabin and go spend the weekend at that beach all by herself, obviously. So she does so, and has one of the best one-night stands, one-weekend stands. She has one of the best weekends of her life with the ocean. I'm gonna let you fill in the blanks there. This is another one of these Sentient Object holiday series, and honestly, it wasn't bad. So if you're new to sentient object romance at all, it's probably important for you to know that the spice is not the point. The point is for the whole story to just be as ridiculous as possible. And I think that this one accomplishes that fairly well. One of the trigger warnings for this book is an inappropriate handling of sea life, and I know where your brain is going, but I promise it's not that. I'm going to let you read for yourself and find out what is actually going on there, but honestly, I enjoyed it. It was really funny. It was a good time. After that, I read Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. It's the third book in the Empyrean series, and if you haven't read Iron Flame yet, I'm not going to give you too much of a summary because it definitely builds off the last book and I don't want to spoil the ending of that one for you. Basically, the whole premise of the book is that Violet and all of her friends go in search of Andarna's family and answers, and possibly Papa Sorengale's research. And some of the first places they look are the islands off the continent. And these islands have no magic, so they kind of have to deal with that at the same time that they are trying to accomplish all their other goals. I'm a pretty big fan of this series as a whole, just as somebody who has a chronic illness that kind of affects my day-to-day life, sort of the way that Violet's does. You know, reading this book so soon after, I don't remember what year specifically Fourth Wing came out, but I think it was only maybe 2 years after my own diagnosis. So when you're kind of in a situation where you are learning to live your life again and trying to find your new normal, books with representation like this are really helpful. You know, as dumb as that sounds with a book about dragons and all of that, I found it to be a very cathartic read. I don't want to say too much because if you haven't read Iron Flame yet, I don't want to ruin it for you, but one of the characters kind of is in a similar situation in which they are trying to relearn how to live again with, you know, a disability. And so having that happen to me later in life, learning to, you know, be okay with using accommodations and stuff is a really hard thing, and I really liked how she wrote that out in this book. So definitely give this one a read. I really enjoyed it. And we go from that very, you know, meaningful and substantive read to My Date with an Edible Book by Holly Wilde. So if you are at all familiar with my TikTok or my Instagram and you have seen the summer smut bingo cards that I put out last year, I will link to those if you haven't, or my review of Halloween by Holly Wilde, you know how much I adore her as an author. So this is another one of those books that is just supposed to be as ridiculous as possible, and she does such a fantastic job with her word choices and stuff like that. So in this book, a chef named Sebastian is headed home after a long night of cooking at his job at a wedding venue, and he wanders through the farmer's market while it's being set up for the day, and he passes this table of books, and a very expensive looking, lovely cookbook seems to throw itself at him. It literally jumps off the table at him, but he doesn't catch that part. So since it looks like it came off the table that says $10 books, he leaves a $10 bill, he picks up the book, and he goes home. And when he takes it home, he's very surprised to learn that this cookbook is actually a book shifter named Sloane. Sloane has unfortunately been trapped in her book form for the last few centuries by her scummy salesman ex-boyfriend. And this guy's not very happy that she has disappeared from his table, because Sloane is very important to his business model. She has magic, there's lots of things that she can do, and he's basically been exploiting that. So Sloane and Sebastian have to figure out how to keep her, you know, free and from falling into the hands of her scummy ex-boyfriend. So this is my second ever arc that I don't actually think I had posted a review for, so I need to get on that, which is very exciting to me because Holly Wilde is one of my all-time favorite sentient object romance authors. She just has such a fantastic way with words that makes me cackle every time I read one of her books. Although this book did introduce me to the word bookussy, so do with that what you will. Also, part of the ending made me seriously grapple with the question, is it technically cannibalism if you turn the guy into a pastry first? So yeah, be prepared for that. But yeah, all in all, this was a delightful little read if you are at all into sentient object romances, so give it a shot. And the last book that I read in January was Conquered by Clippy by Leonard Delaney. This book was exactly what you think it was. This is more of a short story than a book. It's not very long. It'll take you maybe an hour to get through it, if that. It's about a journalist named Christy Ackerland. The author goes through great pains in the beginning of the story to make sure that we know that Christy is a strong, independent woman who does not need any help at all from anyone. Christy's flown out to a very remote location in the desert by the world's biggest technology company, who I'm sure you can guess, but we can't name names because this is not a book that I think the creators of Clippy want to be associated with in any way, so yeah. Anyways, they fly her out to the desert because she's supposed to be investigating an alien artifact. The artifact in question turns out to be a giant, sentient, overly helpful paperclip who seems intent on helping Christy with whatever she may need at the time, despite the fact that she is a strong, independent woman who doesn't need help from anyone, especially a giant sentient paperclip. Unfortunately, an earthquake separates them from Christy's escort, and since they're trapped underground together, alone, things get a little hot and heavy, so I'm gonna let you fill in the blanks from there. This book was exactly what you would expect it to be, and I don't really have any notes other than that. It was very poorly written, but like in a way that makes it seem like it was on purpose. And if you want an example of what I mean, you can go read the author bio because it's really funny. And like, kudos to the author because I feel like you actually have to try to make it poorly written and make it sound good, if that makes any sense at all. All in all, it wasn't like my favorite sentient object romance I've ever read. It certainly wasn't the worst, but I feel like if you're a fan of the genre, you should read it just for the hell of it. I feel like that would be time pretty well spent. So, now we're on to February. In terms of February statistics, I read a total of 11 books, which amounted to 1,352 pages, 71.27 hours listened, so quite a few of the books that I read this month were audiobooks, which counts. I don't want to hear it. The average length in pages of those books was 339, and I had an average rating of 4.55. So I read 4 different genres. 6 were fantasy, 2 were romance. Of those 2, 1 was kind of almost YA adjacent, and 1 was a dark romance. I read 2 horror, read 1 mystery thriller kind of deal. I read 2 different formats, so 4 of the books that I read were digital and 7 were audiobooks. I was very heavy on the audiobooks this month. 100% of the books that I read this month were from the library, so go me. So the first book that I read in February was Lights Out. It was the audiobook version, which I highly recommend because it is so entertaining. It's narrated by Elena Wolf and Jacob Morgan, and Jacob Morgan just does such a fantastic job as Josh. Lights Out is about a trauma nurse named Allie, who is very deep into the mask talk side of the internet, and like, who among us isn't, to be honest. And so one night after she's had a particularly rough shift, she's like, hey, I kind of want to try this whole mask thing out. So she sends a screenshot of her favorite creator to the guy she's been hooking up with and said, hey, why don't we try this whole mask thing out in the bedroom? Like, it could be fun, just a suggestion. And he's not into it, but he happens to show the screenshot to his roommate, and wouldn't you know it, the roommate, Josh, is this creator that she's such a huge fan of. So Josh has met Allie a handful of times, and since he's got a little bit of a crush on her, obviously the most sensible thing for him to do is break into her house, befriend her cat, and plant cameras everywhere before filming a thirst trap in her bedroom for her to find on the internet later. And so they kind of play this little cat and mouse game for a little while. It's very entertaining. And eventually Allie just falls head over heels for this guy. Unfortunately, somebody that she meets at work is very interested in her. And this guy definitely does not have as good of intentions as Josh does. So Josh has to figure out a way to keep Allie safe without becoming the thing that he always feared, which is his father. All in all, this book was adorable. I cannot recommend it enough, especially the audiobook. Both the narrators do a fantastic job, but Jacob Morgan really knocks this out of the park, so definitely give it a listen. So next up is We Used to Live Here by Daniel Hurst. I found this while I was looking for the Marcus Cleaver version, and honestly, I should have just kept looking. So I will let you do with that what you will. So it's about this couple named Steph and Grant, and so they and their very young children move into a new house. It's supposed to be their dream house, their forever home. Very shortly after they move in, this elderly couple stops by. It's, I think, the couple that built the house, so they just stop in and they want to look around for old time's sake. So it starts very similar to the Marcus Cleaver version of this, but decidedly less supernatural and interesting. And so they have this visit and everything is hunky-dory. Then one day while Steph is stripping wallpaper, she finds a really creepy message from what turns out to be their son. And so she starts digging into the history of the house and the history of the family that used to live there, and she finds out that they're all connected to a very serious potential crime that would have been committed at the time that they lived in the house. And then she's just obsessed with it. She has to find out whatever she can. And this growing obsession of hers really bothers Grant, and so they're kind of trying to work their way through that and figure out the truth while staying together. Honestly, this book was fine, but I don't think I was the intended audience for it. Like, it was just... Apologies in advance to the British people, but this was a very British book. I don't know, it was just a very dry book. It was very predictable. The twist at the end was very predictable and like needed to have been fleshed out a little bit more, I think. But like, it was fine. I think the thing that bothered me most is there's like a pretty heavy infidelity aspect to it. That's just one of those things that I cannot stand in a book. Like, if it's like an outside character to kind of set up the plot for the rest of the book a little bit, that's one thing. But when you have one of your main characters like engaging in that behavior on page, I'm not here for it. I don't like it. I don't want to read about it. So if you like thrillers that aren't necessarily all that thrilling, or you're looking for just an introduction to the genre, this would probably be a good place to start. It just wasn't for me. Next, I did a reread of The Sword of Destiny by Andrzej Sapkowski. It's been a really long time since I read this book. I have a physical copy of it somewhere, but I don't know where it is, so I listened to the audiobook. This is the one that happens chronologically right before Blood of Elves. The last 2 stories are where Geralt meets Ciri for the first time, and then when they kind of reconnect. And so I really enjoyed this. I almost enjoyed the audiobook better than I did the paperback, because Peter Kenny is the narrator and he does a really fantastic job. One of the stories involves Geralt communicating with a mermaid, and so you get to hear Peter Kenny as Geralt singing back to the mermaids, and it entertained me to no end. You should listen to it just for that, like, if nothing else. So I almost enjoy the short story collections that happen before like the series proper better than I like the actual series. With the X-Files and Supernatural and stuff, I've always been more of a monster of the day person, the whole storyline. I just like seeing all the monsters and stuff. Just because the series proper is so politically heavy, like there's so much stuff to keep track of. So if you're looking for like some bite-sized fantasy chapters to read, this is a really good option. I really enjoy like all the world building and stuff that happens in those stories, so like give those a shot. You'll probably really enjoy them. Then I listened to all 5 of the Memoirs of Lady Trent. I cannot begin to tell you how much I enjoyed this series, and I can't really give you a summary of like each book on its own because they build so heavily off one another, and I don't want to spoil anything for you. But the premise of the series as a whole is about Lady Isabella Camhurst, who is Lady Trent. She's writing these as her memoirs like much later in her life. And Isabella is one of the world's premier dragon naturalists in this world. So it's in a very Victorian setting and is set kind of in a parallel world to ours, and there's dragons. And the dragons in this book aren't like big magical creatures and stuff, they're just giant lizards. So Lady Trent goes and studies these dragons like I would go study birds, or like a marine biologist would go study dolphins. And so because it's a Victorian-ish setting, and because she is of a certain class, there are definitely social norms that she's supposed to be adhering to, but she decides fairly early on in her life that that would make her absolutely miserable, so she's like, no, I'm not doing this. And so the book kind of follows her climb through the ranks and like breaking all the glass ceilings and studying dragons. We get a lot of like dragon physiology and anatomy, which is wonderful. Again, as a former research technician and just a big fan of dragons in general, I enjoyed every second of that. So it's really interesting to read like how she handles all of the hurdles and stuff that are tossed her way, and it's really refreshing to see male characters like her dad and like her friend's grandpa and like her friend. She has a very close male friend that's just totally platonic. It's just very lovely to see those male characters help her get to where she wants to go and like using their privilege to kind of help her out there. I really enjoyed that. Her husband is just fucking adorable. I love him as a character. And also, she has a very close male friend that she meets in the first book, and they hate each other at the beginning, but then over the course of the first book, they kind of get to know one another a little bit better, and they are just a totally platonic pair of friends through the rest of the series, and that is also a very refreshing thing to see. I really enjoyed that aspect of this series. So yeah, there's dragons, there's biology, there's Victorian era scandals. I loved it. So if you're into any of that, this is the series for you. So the first book kind of covers like Isabella's entire childhood and her marriage and how she found her husband and the excursion that they took to, I think the equivalent would be Romania. That's the excursion that got her on the track to being a dragon naturalist. The second book deals with the rainforest and swamp worms. The third book, she and her friend charter a ship and go on a round-the-world trip to study dragons all over the place. The fourth one, they go to like a Middle Eastern desert to try to start a dragon breeding program. And then the last one's a little bit weird and almost felt kind of out of place, but if you're putting together the context clues through the rest of the series, it works, I think. I kind of wish it was more similar to the rest of the series, and so we would get more biology of the dragons that she encounters in the last third of the book. But you know, it is what it is. I enjoyed it anyway. I think there's a spin-off about her granddaughter. I haven't read it yet. I don't know if I'm going to, but I did. I loved this series so much. The whole series is narrated by Kate Redding, and she just does a wonderful job. Cannot recommend the series enough. It's fantastic. Please someone read it so I have someone to talk to about it. I haven't been able to talk anyone I know into reading it, so please, someone, I'm begging you. So next was The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher. This wasn't my favorite T. Kingfisher book, but I still loved every second of it. The book centers around Kara, who's a recently divorced woman, and so Kara needs a little bit of time and space to get back on her feet. So her uncle Earl, who's her favorite uncle, calls her and says, hey, I need your help. I need to go for surgery. I've hurt my knee. Can you come give me a hand? And so her uncle Earl, who just sounds like a total sweetheart, has this roadside museum that's full of weird stuff that is probably mostly hoaxes. Honestly, this sounds like my kind of place. It's taxidermy, it's like stuff that his internet friends send him, so like, hey, this piece of tin foil is probably from a UFO, or this is an actual Fiji mermaid. It's not. It's just really weird random stuff like that. So this building of his is stuffed just floor to ceiling. Honestly, it sounds pretty cool. It sounds like the kind of place I would visit on a road trip. So Kara packs up and moves into the museum. Uncle Earl goes to have surgery on his knee, so Kara's left taking care of things. And so while Kara is cataloging a bunch of stuff, she finds that there is a weird hole in the wall of the museum. She obviously thinks this is weird, so she goes to the cafe next door and finds her friend Simon. And Simon comes over to try to help her fix the drywall, but while they're doing that, they figure out that the place that this hole in the wall leads to should not exist. Like, it's not physically possible for it to be there. And so the whole story is about what's on the other side of this hole in the wall, and Kara and Simon's discovery of the things that live behind the wall and their need to keep those things on that side of the wall. So they gotta figure out what caused it, how do they get rid of it, how do they keep these things from coming over, because that would be very bad. So like I said, this wasn't my very favorite T. Kingfisher work, but I thought it was really, really great all in all. It was definitely very creepy. I really enjoyed Simon's character. I would like him to have his own spin-off series because it just seems like weird things happen to him all the time. Like, he's just entirely way too chill about everything. And, like, there's things that happen that he's definitely not okay with, but he handles it like a champ. I also really enjoyed Kara's character arc because she's really broken up about her divorce in the beginning. So by the time that her ex-husband is, like, calling her to say, hey, I found somebody else, and is, like, very obviously fishing for her attention, she's just like, okay, I have bigger things to worry about. She obviously is occupied by, you know, dangerous entities on the other side of a mysterious portal that has just materialized in the middle of her uncle's museum, and it just drives him nuts, and it's just, I love to see it. I really do. That was probably my favorite part of the entire book, is just one of the phone calls that they have. So yeah, give it a shot if you're a fan of horror or you just like T. Kingfisher. It was great. So next was Divine Rivals, and I don't know why I put off reading this one so long, because I really enjoyed it. I haven't read the sequel yet, but I am very glad that I picked it up eventually. So in this story, there is a war between two gods. One of them has been sleeping for centuries, and he wakes up and wants revenge on the other one who put him to sleep, and so they're going to war, and they have enlisted humans to fight this war for them by proxy, essentially. So that's kind of the context. At the beginning of the book, Iris is at the train station with her brother, who is going to fight for one of the gods, and she doesn't really want him to go, but he's been called, so he's going anyway. And so Iris is obviously very worried about him, so she writes him letters and puts them under the door of her wardrobe, and she doesn't know that these letters are actually being sent somewhere. They are being sent to this boy named Roman Kit, and Roman is her rival at work. They're both journalists, they're both competing for the same position, and one day Roman decides he's going to write back anonymously, and so the book kind of follows them writing back and forth between one another, and it kind of follows them like through the course of the war, and like one of them going to the front lines and everything to be a reporter there. And this was just a really lovely read. I really enjoyed this. You know, there's some darker themes, but it's fairly light. It does leave you on a fairly big cliffhanger, so I gotta get the next one on my queue here soon because I gotta know what happens. It's a little bit more YA coded than I normally read, but it is a really good option if you're looking for a romance that's closed door. And the last book that I read in February was The Dead Girls Club by Damien and Angelica Walter. The Dead Girls Club was started by Heather and her friend Becca and two of their other friends. It's basically just a club where they can go and talk about macabre stuff like ghost stories and true crime and stuff like that, hence the name The Dead Girls Club. You know, typical elementary girl stuff. There's kind of two different time periods here. So there's present day, where Heather is an adult and a child psychologist, and then back in 1991 before Becca's disappearance. And so back in 1991, when the girls are like getting together and meeting one another, Becca's telling them this story about the Red Lady, who is a vengeful spirit who visits her wrath upon people who she feels has done her wrong. So after telling the girls in the Dead Girls Club about the Red Lady for like weeks on end, Becca disappears. And then flash forward to present day, Heather's now an adult, she's a child psychologist, so she starts receiving items that once belonged to Becca, and this obviously throws her way off balance. She starts looking to the other former members of the Dead Girls Club. The book kind of flashes back and forth between 1991, where we learn more about Becca and her obsession with the Red Lady and how that may have caused her disappearance, to present day, where Heather is trying to find out who is sending her Becca's old stuff. You know, is she actually being haunted by the Red Lady, or is she being haunted by Becca, or is somebody just after her and trying to make her life miserable? It's really interesting the way that was handled. I don't think that I was really the target audience for this book, but I probably would recommend it to you if you like stuff like The Girl on the Train, that kind of thing. I don't know, it was okay. It was good, it just didn't wow me, you know? That was it for February. As for March, I didn't read anything in March. March was a really rough month for me because my gran passed away at the tail end of February, and so we were dealing with like the funeral and all of that. Started the prep for the surgery I had done in April. I got a minor cold from somewhere, thought I got off scot-free, and then got hit with like the straight up plague, and so was down and out for the rest of March pretty much. So yeah, I read almost nothing. I think I might have read a few pages of The Deep, but nothing worth writing home about, I guess. I definitely didn't finish it. So yeah, that's that. But that's probably not a bad thing because this video is already way longer than I think it maybe needs to be. So yeah, we're gonna just leave things here. If any of these books sound good to you, I will have them all on their respective lists on my Venable profile, which are linked down in the description. Of course, I always recommend checking your local library first because they could really use your support. So yeah, give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. If you want to see more from me, consider subscribing, and I will catch you next time. So stay safe and enjoy your book. Bye.